Hi, John Larry Clark here again for session two of the apocalypse of your heart and mine. If you read the text that accompanied my video, not just here, but on YouTube, you know that before I retired, I went around and I told a lot of people what I was going to do in my retirement was write a book about integrity and character. Many things had stirred in me over the years in my business and in ministry as well, and it all came back to character. And so inside I was troubled, and the more I thought about it, the more I felt it was important. And this was well before all the political stuff was going on and all of the COVID. So what I found out was, character integrity are matters of the heart. They're very hard to write about in a way because everybody has their own determinations of what that is. But our hearts motivate us so much. I believe the heart and the character and the integrity of God lives in us. How do I know? Because there's been a constant struggle with me to do the right thing many, many, many times. And I'm sure I'm not alone in this. So let's go back a little bit. Let's remember that first off, that apocalypse is not the end of the world. It's the unveiling. It's a revelation. And that's what that word means. And so, what we want to do is we want to have a revelation and an unveiling, if you will, in our hearts of the God that is in us, the God that created us. And that was one of the questions that I asked was, do you know you were created in the image and the likeness of God? That means you carry part of him, like a DNA. You carry his character, you carry his heart, if you will. He's motivated by his own heart, which is love and grace and mercy. Did you know God thought of each of us and gave us an identity before we were born? Did you know God also likes to hide things from us? And even at times, it seems like he likes to confuse us. Why? Because so much we are trying to get God to match up to us rather than us matching up to him. So when we say we want to understand God, it's almost impossible to understand God. He's very incongruent. He has his own will and his own ways. So where does that leave us? Well, it leaves us with a mystery of how do we unfold all this? And that's what this whole series that I want to talk about is all about. So just as if God was our natural father, his DNA of his heart is in ours. So let's go back to the creation event, right to the beginning, when we entered the grandest story in all of history and see what unfolds. We see God at the very beginning as a powerful, purposeful, wise, and full of glory guy. Man was made by God not simply to analyze God as a scientist or an astronomer or a philosopher. First and foremost, we were created to be in relationship with God, to co reign with Him over His creation and display His glory, which is all around us. He's generous. It wasn't about a serve, that we would serve him in the regard of working in the field and all this. He really wanted us to have dominion with him, control over this earth, because it's like one of the most beautiful things he created other than you and me. So we in our hearts were created to experience the pleasure of being loved by God and relating to his heart. However, all is not what he intended. Despite the act of disobedience, blaming, and all of the ripple effects that took place in the act in the Garden of Eden, God had a plan to rescue humanity and put the world back together his way. It all begins in our hearts, where he lives, veiled by the fall and being the things of this world that affect our hearts. All those things that, whether they came from our parents or our schools or world crises or whatever it is, those veil him. So they don't seem like we're in constant contact with it. Yes, choices involved as well. He still wants us to co-reign with him and experience the pleasure of being loved by him. So how do we get there? Back to the garden. Soon after the biggest oops ever in the garden, God is seen walking through the garden, and the first question God asked our ancestors, asked Adam, was, "Where are you?" See, he was seeking their presence. The question clearly shows that we belong to God and that he longs for each of us to examine our own lives, be honest with him, and come out of hiding. God is helping unveil that which keeps us separated from being in total relationship with him and from finding our true identities and purpose. He's promised these things. God is the perfect Father, a Father that began the redemption process of relationship. He did what any good father would and should do when his kids fall short. He wrapped his love around them. He did not degrade them. He did not shame them. He didn't do any of the things that we see mostly today. He was moved by love. So he covered their shame. He put them back on the path. I have studied the scriptures for years looking for a father role model because I needed one when I became a father. You know what? In all the scriptures, there's not one good one, but the scriptures lead back to the only good one, and that's Papa Lord, Abba, Father. So God did not remove the promise of co-reigning or have dominion over the earth with him, but things did change, especially with Adam and Eve. In one translation, God says to Eve, "You will have the desire to dominate your husband, but he will want to dominate you." Is this the beginning of control issues? We have a lot of control issues in this world. And boy, I'm going to talk a lot about them in the future. We're going to talk about free will, control, self. We're going to talk about narcissism. To me, one of the most rampant diseases in society. So, because of Adam and Eve's failure, the vision God had for us was temporarily delayed, but the vision is still the same. In this world that seems so self-oriented with endless distinctions to separate from others in community, this all flies in the face of God's vision and intentions for us as humanity. If you study especially the books in Romans and Galatians, you'll find that, the writings and the interpretation of what God's hearts are is to have us all be one and not have distinctions of value or worth or anything else, because that's not what he does. When God blesses, he doesn't look at your value. He blesses because it's his will. And so that makes him so different and so difficult to understand. God took great joy to create each of us as unique, one-up kids. No two are the same. He loves diversity of race. He gives gifts to everyone, regardless of how we would think about doing it. See, we're the ones who place value on people. We're the ones who rank who's the highest, who's the lowest, who's the winner, who's the loser. God doesn't do that. We need to learn from him. All the struggles that are happening in this world today are as a result of our choices, our thoughts, our ways. I think it's time we draw close to him and learn his ways. his way to love, his way to forgive, his grace, which is huge. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about grace because it'll mess up your mind. He loves distinctions because God created all these distinctions in us. So God's the best father. I'm going to call God a lot of things. I'm going to call him a lover and a friend and a brother and a teacher, a prophet, a savior. I'm going to call him all kinds of things as I develop the story of redemption in our hearts, because that's how the unveiling takes place. I look forward to seeing you again, and I thank you so much for all that you are today. Take care.